And we are live as soon as I get the camera up and going here. All right, welcome into week one of SEC football. I know we had the, sorry about that, the opener Thursday night with Tennessee and Bowling Green. But today we got a full slate of college football action. So bear with me just a moment while I adjust something really quickly. All right, so we're live. And let's take a look at some of these upcoming games on the SEC slate here today. So getting us started right at the end of this hour-long show will be Kentucky hosting Louisiana Monroe. And all of these times will be Central Time. Arkansas will be hosting Rice at 2:30 Central Time. 2:30 Central Time. Alabama will be taking on the University of Miami there in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game, followed by at 3 p.m. Mississippi State playing host to Louisiana Tech, Missouri hosting Central Michigan. Kicking off the night slate in the SEC, Auburn will be hosting Akron. South Carolina will be taking on Eastern Illinois. The big matchup of the opening weekend, Clemson will be taking on Georgia. Florida will be hosting Florida Atlantic. Texas A&M will be taking on Kent State. And Vanderbilt will be hosting East Tennessee State. And the final SEC matchup tonight, LSU will be traveling to Los Angeles to face the UCLA Bruins. So busy weekend for all the SEC teams. The only team not in action today, they will be playing Monday night. The Ole Miss Rebels will be taking on the Louisville Cardinal. Just got some late breaking news. Lane Kiffin will not be coaching in that game as he's tested positive for COVID, so he would not be traveling with the team. And wish Lane a full and speedy recovery. So the chat lines are open, and whatever you guys want to talk about as far as your teams and matchups, I will be looking until we get some comments in the chat line at some of the lines here. So bear with me as I kind of scroll through that. So for Alabama-Miami, that game opened with Bama favored by 17.5. That line's already up to 19. So we'll be interested to see where that line takes us prior to kickoff. For the Georgia-Clemson game, that game opened with Clemson favored by 3.5. That number now sits at Clemson -3 for that contest. Now, here's one that's been really interesting and something that my team and I talked about on our podcast over at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. This UCLA-LSU line opened with LSU favored by 4. That line's down to 2.5. So a key number in our world, the handicapping world, is the key numbers are 3, 4, 7, and 8. And with that number now below a key number, interested to see how much money has come in on the UCLA Bruins to cover that spread. Bear with me just a second, and I will be able to share that with you. So right now, UCLA is getting 49% of the total money bet in that game. So that's why you see that line dropping the way it has. Louisville, Ole Miss. This game opened with Ole Miss as a 7.5-point favorite. That line is now up to Ole Miss favored by 10 on Monday night. Interested to see how the news with Lane Kiffin not being able to coach in that ball game over the next, I would say, 12 to 24 hours really want to pay very close attention on how that number moves. Kentucky. Want to say hello to my good friend, Miss Cynthia, who's going to be checking in on the show here a little bit later. Your Wildcats opened up as a 28.5 point favorite. Guys, that line is already up to 31, so we're expecting to see a really big offensive output there for Kentucky in this ball game. Arkansas Rice, that line opened with Arkansas favored by 21.5. That line now sits at Arkansas favored by 19.5. Missouri Central Michigan. Missouri opened up as a 12.5 point favorite. That line is now up to 14. Mississippi State versus La Tech. That game opened with Mississippi State up by, favored by, I should say, 27.5. That line is now down to Mississippi State by 23. Interested to see how the quarterback battle there in Starkville will affect that number whatsoever, as Mike Leach hasn't settled in on a quarterback. So expect that to kind of play out throughout this contest. For the Auburn-Akron game, and guys, Akron is kind of like Bowling Green, one of the lowest power-rated teams for us in all of the Division I football. This line opened with Arkansas favored by 35.5. That number now sits as Auburn favored by 37. Interested to see Brian Harsin in his first game as the head man there in Auburn. What is he going to show with quarterback Bo Nix in this ball game? Going to be really interested to see. So we'll be talking about that on the follow-up show tonight. And speaking of the show tonight, we're going to be moving around the start times with shows for the Texas A&M follow-up show as well as the Florida show. So stay tuned on Twitter to get the show times for the wrap-up show that I'll be doing here later on tonight. And if you haven't already done so, please give Mark a follow at the there we go at the new Twitter handle show on Twitter, Voice of CFB. You can also give me a follow along with my team at Crunch Time VIP. For the best picks by your favorite media personalities, join Mark on Patreon at joinmarkrogerstv.com. Getting back to the rest of the lines here. Florida opened up against FAU as a 24.5 point favorite. Guys, that number's down to 23.5. Expect to see a lot of Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson in this ball game. And guys, I'm going to go ahead and drop this nugget for you. Do not be surprised by the time we get to Florida, LSU, and certainly after the bye week, Florida, Georgia, that Anthony Richardson is not the starting quarterback for the University of Florida. Have been hearing a lot of whispers out of that Florida camp, and especially listening to the comments of Dan Mullen talking high praise for this quarterback. Don't be surprised to see that quarterback change, especially if Emory Jones does not show in these first two contests before the Alabama game the ability to improve on his passing stats. Texas A&M versus Kent State. This should be a showcase game for quarterback Haynes King for the University of Florida. I'm sorry, for Texas A&M in this ball game. That line is already up to 29. I would not be surprised by the time we get to kickoff tonight that game doesn't tick over 30. Alabama Roll Tide, thanks for checking in. Yes, it is game day, and I'm sure all the Crimson Tide fans are ready for this matchup. And if you give me just a second, once I get through the last couple of lines here, I will talk about that matchup here. South Carolina versus Eastern Illinois. Guys, this line opened with South Carolina by 42. This game is already down to 31.5. With the quarterback situation there in South Carolina, we've seen a major move in this ball game. Do not be surprised if this line gets below 30 before 6 p.m. Eastern time. I'm sorry, 6 p.m. Time tonight. Last matchup, East Tennessee State will be traveling to Nashville to take on the new look Vanderbilt Commodores. That line opened with Vandy as a 21.5-point favorite, down just a tick, down to 21. Let's get into that Alabama game here. So, absolutely, you can catch the voice of the Alabama. You can catch the game at 3:30 Eastern time. And to answer your question, you have Alabama winning 40-20. That's right in line with where Vegas has that line set. Going to be interested to see how that plays out. So I went back and I wanted to break down this matchup to really set the stage for what you're going to see tonight. De'Aaron King in 10 ball games last year, 201 completions, 316 attempts, 63.6% completion percentage, good for 8.1 yards per attempt. Hold on to that number here for just a second. 2,573 yards, 22 touchdowns, 5 INTs. Now, in the two biggest matchups that Miami had last year versus Clemson versus North Carolina, I'll give you stats for each game. Versus Clemson, King was 12 for 28, 42.9% completion percentage, only 121 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 INTs. Against North Carolina, 18 completions, 30 attempts, 60% completion percentage, 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT. You combine those two together, you get 30 completions, 78 attempts, 51.7% completion percentage. So almost a solid 12 points lower against the two best teams that he faced last year. 360 yards combined passing in those two games, 2 touchdowns, 3 INTs. And mind you, King was healthy in those two contests. He's coming off a torn ACL, torn meniscus, 8 months almost to the day when he tore his knee up in the bowl game against Oklahoma State. He's not healthy, has not had contact practice since last December. And he's going up against one of the 4 best pass rushing teams in all of college football here. So it's going to be interesting to see just how well he performs in this matchup. And to answer your next question, I would definitely agree with that. Early on in the ball game, expect to see Alabama take their shots when there. But Bill O'Brien is going to hammer into Bryce Young. If it's not there, take the check down to one of these talented running backs, whether it's Jace McClellan, Brian Robertson, or Trey Sanders in this ball game. The Clemson Georgia game, huge playoff implications for this game. Not only for the winner, but also for the loser, because if you look at the remaining schedules for both teams, there's not a lot of meat on the bone for either one of those teams as far as the regular season goes. Florida is the only remaining team that could be ranked in the top 25 at that time. And for Clemson, with that North Carolina loss being very significant for their playoffs hopes, Clemson cannot afford to lose this game tonight to Georgia, because it puts them in a difficult situation to get back into college football playoffs. You could see potentially 2 teams from the SEC, Ohio State and Oklahoma, get in, leaving Clemson out of the college football playoffs. I would say, okay, so for Alabama, here's what you want to see in this contest and what I'm looking for from the analyst side of it. I want to see what is Bryce Young's yards per attempt. Last year, Mac Jones, and I'm just talking in the SEC, Mac Jones, Kyle Trask, Matt Corral, they were around that 10 yards per attempt number. And what that's going to tell you is how explosive the passing game is. If you're seeing that number around 9.5, 10, you know that this offense is going to be extremely explosive in the passing game, like we've seen over the past couple of years, whether it was Tua or Mac Jones last year. If that number is just a little bit low, say 8.5 to 9, that means they're just working on Bryce's completion percentage, which is not a bad thing to do in this ball game. But more so next week, I would expect to see a heavy dose of passing game, getting ready for that huge matchup down in Gainesville in week 3. And guys, feel free to keep dropping your questions into the chats. I will get to them as much as possible. Voice of College Football. Yeah, Mark put that, and I'll put that right back up on the screen. He has Alabama winning 40-20. So got Alabama covering the point spread in that ball game by the thinnest of margins. So it's gonna be fantastic to really see how that game winds up. Okay, so in this matchup, and that's a fantastic question. So I typically don't give predictions, but I will give the keys to victory for both teams here. So I'll let you kind of marry that out. For UCLA, it's imperative to get off to an early start. Really force this LSU team to have those doubts from last season creep back in. We saw this team absolutely get lit up in coverage last year, starting with that Mississippi State game where Mississippi State set an SEC record for passing in a single conference game last year. So I want to see UCLA really attack this defense, and not so much on the perimeter with Eli Ricks and Derek Stingley Jr. I want to see them work the intermediate and middle part of the field. That run game we saw with Cabernet last week versus Hawaii, got to see that same kind of effort against a much stiffer competition in LSU. For LSU, your keys to victory is you must play fundamental football. Did not see that last year. Saw a lot of busted coverage in that secondary. Your defensive coordinator, this will be his first opportunity to call defense at this level in college after spending 5 years in the NFL. So really excited to see how this game matches up. We've talked about how the line is dropped. I think that has a lot to do with the prep time for LSU being completely disrupted by Hurricane Ida. And for all of us here, our thoughts and prayers continue to go out to everyone that was affected by that devastating hurricane. We saw damage all the way up the eastern seaboard. So please do be safe in that ball game. Got Kobe checking in. Hey, Kobe, how's everything going? Wow, you got Alabama really rolling, and no pun intended there, 45-7. That's going to be interesting, and I will give you something from our notes from the handicapping aspect of this ball game. If Alabama is up big in the first half, Miami will pull De'Aaron King out of this ball game and go with quarterback Van Dyke. Let me get his name really quickly here so I can make sure I give him hate butchering people's names. So Tyler Van Dyke. So Tyler Van Dyke will be up next in that ball game. Did get a injury update. Left tackle for Miami, and really their best offensive lineman, Zion Nelson, will be a go in this ball game. Don Chaney Jr., probable. Expected to see limited snaps in this ball game, just depending on how that shoulder reacts. Expect to see a heavy dose of Cameron Harris in this ball game. For us on the defensive side, Jay Severa, their best defensive tackle, would not be in the starting rotation. Expected to play some snaps, just depending on how much he can go in this ball game. Undisclosed injury, so we can't really tell you exactly what the injury is, but that's where that stands. Also in this ball game, Miami's going to start they're going to start the young pups, Zach McLeod, and from what I'm understanding, Zach Brooks is going to be starting at the wheel linebacker position. And if this is correct, Al Blades Jr. is not in the starting lineup for Miami, who is their best secondary player, along with Bubba Bowden, who plays that safety position. So those are some thoughts for that. Okay, Kobe, so you are an Auburn fan. So, Kobe, let me get your thoughts, and I would love for you to jump back in the chat here and let me know, what do you think about your quarterback situations? Because from what I'm understanding out of that camp, Bo Nix is on a very short leash there in Auburn, which he hasn't been in his entire collegiate career. Would not be surprised by the time we go to Penn State, you see a two-quarterback rotation there, and I would not be shocked at all if TJ Finley isn't your starting quarterback by the time you get into the heart of SEC conference play. You got Georgia winning 28-24. That's interesting. Let's see. Alabama Roll Tide got Georgia winning 50-45. Whoa. Alabama Roll Tide, unless this game goes into 5 or 6 overtimes, I do not see that being the final score. These are two of the best defenses in all of college football. I talked about it on our podcast on the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. You can actually head over to our Twitter page, and I will put that up here for you in just a moment. Oh, yeah, it's still scrolling. Okay, so head over to Crunch Time VIP, and you can listen to our game breakdown of that. These are two of the best defensive lines in all of college football. For Clemson, led by Miles Murphy, who can absolutely be a game wrecker, along with his running mate on the outside, KJ Henry. Expect him to squeeze that pocket on Georgia, really forcing JT Daniels to play in his really first meaningful game as the quarterback there for the University of Georgia. Look who he played against last year. And while Mississippi State had one of the better defenses in the SEC last year, make no mistake, they're not in the same caliber as Clemson. Talk about Georgia as far as their defense goes. Guys, their front seven is as good and as nasty as anybody, led by Jordan, and they are just absolutely furious. So expect to see more of a 37-34, and I'm not going to tell you which way I'm leaning on that, but I will say I do not expect that final score to be 50-45 unless, like I said, we go into several overtimes in this ball game. Kobe talked about that on a couple of podcasts where I really broke down Auburn, and I won't say Bo Nix sucks. I will just say he hasn't developed as a collegiate quarterback. If you really go back and look at his stats, he's an inconsistent quarterback, which I think Auburn fans all recognize. And for him to finally get pushed by TJ Finley, I think that will either elevate his game or he'll find himself on the bench. How about this? 28-14 UGA wins. Okay, so I'm starting to see some people picking Georgia in this ball game. Really would love to hear from everybody that's watching right now. What do you think is the advantage Georgia has in this ball game over Clemson? Because that's one that I've really struggled with for the lead up for this contest. It's not coaching. Dabo Swinney, by far and away, is a better head coach than Kirby Smart at this point. 2 national championships to none. As far as the quarterback experience goes, JT Daniels played in a couple of games last year, like I mentioned, versus Mississippi State, versus South Carolina, who had just fired Will Muschamp, and their best player on defense, J.C. Horn, opted out of that game, along with a couple of other key defensive players. And JT did not look really good in that ball game. Let me see if I can pull up his numbers here. 10 for 16, 62.5% completion percentage, 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT. So not spectacular numbers there. I don't think that Georgia has the advantage at the wide receiver spot versus Clemson defensive backs. So really would love to hear from everybody that's in the chat right now. Where do you see the advantage for Georgia in this ball game? Because I'm not convinced that they have one from an offense, their offense versus that Clemson defense. Now, there is one advantage I do see. Ethan, that's exactly my point. I trust Dabo because he's done it in big games, and we can circle 2 very high-profile games where Kirby got a little bit tight in those ball games. You saw it in the second half versus Alabama last year. Georgia had the lead. Alabama comes storming back 14-0 in the second half. Now, Georgia fans are going to hate to hear these next 2 stats. The second half against Alabama, first half against Florida, the 4 most important quarters that the University of Georgia played last year. They were outscored 14-0 in the second half by Alabama, 38-21 versus Florida. That's 52-21. You're outscored by, count them, 4 touchdowns and a field goal. You can't put that on Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett does not play defense. Stetson Bennett wasn't the one that was getting beat on wheel routes by Florida. Stetson Bennett wasn't the defensive back that misplayed the cross route with Alabama, where Jaden Waddle goes for, I think it was 85 or 90 yards in that ball game. Broke the game open at that point to start the third quarter. So really fascinated to see how Georgia makes some of those adjustments, because it's not just Kirby Smart that's under heat here. Defensive coordinator Dan Lanning, pressure is on him to not give up those huge passing yards that we saw last season. As far as Clemson in this matchup, there's one advantage that when I was doing my breakdown for this ball game, that I felt like Georgia had a major advantage in this ball game. And it's going to be up to Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for Georgia, to really implement this. If you go 4 wide receivers in this ball game, you're doing Clemson a favor in this contest. For me, you're down George Pickens, your best wide receiver, out with a torn ACL. Arik Gilbert, away from the team right now, unavailable. Darnell Washington, the tight end, out with a foot injury, expected to miss anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So you're going to rely on Curious Jackson Jermaine Burton, Blaylock. If you go to a 11 personnel, that's 3 wide receivers, tight end, running back, you're now giving Brent Venables the advantage in this matchup between the Georgia offense, Clemson defense, because their 3 corners are better than Georgia's 3 wide receivers. Andrew Booth is projected to be in next year's draft either a late first, mid-second round pick. Jones, the other starting cornerback, talented well, and either Mario Goodrich or Fred Davis II will be that nickel corner. And what you're doing is you're taking off the biggest weakness for this Clemson ball club. Their linebackers, whether it's Simpson, Skowski, or Spector, are not great in coverage. They're great in run defense, not great in coverage. So why, if I'm Todd Monken, do I want to take those take those linebackers off the field and allow them to go to their better personnel grouping, whether it's the nickel or dime? So here's a formation personnel grouping that I felt like would absolutely give Georgia a huge advantage in this ball game. And it's one that you haven't heard talked about, but I'm going to walk you through it here on this show because we're talking college football SEC style. 20 personnel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the personnel groupings, that's 2 running backs, that's 3 wide receivers, no tight ends. And what that does for an offense like Georgia is it forces Brent Venables to now predetermine what he's going to do on defense. Is he going to play with linebackers or is he going to play with cornerbacks? If he goes nickel, what I can do with Zamir White, Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, James Cook, I can rotate those 4 running backs in and off the field and really kind of dictate what Brent Venables is going to show me. I can motion out, and I'm just going to run through a play real quick here. So I got Kenny McIntosh and Zamir White. I got Zamir to my left. I got McIntosh to my right. I'm going to motion, and I'm in the shotgun, so I got JT Daniels in the gun. I'm going to motion across the formation McIntosh, and I'm going to now have him in the slot. So now I have a wide receiver at the X. I have now McIntosh in the slot, and then out to the wide side or the 3 side now, I have wide receivers now. Then I'm going to motion Zamir White to now get into the traditional I formation. So he's now lined up directly behind JT Daniels. Now, it looks like from the sky cam, it's going to look like we're in a spread set now. It looks like we're in a 2x2 set now. So I got 2 wide receivers on both sides, and now I have a really, really dynamic running back in the backfield. I can now run Zamir White to the left. I can run him up the middle. I can run him to the left. Want to stay away from that middle because that interior of that Clemson D-line is really good. But now I can go hurry up versus tempo. And hurry up, the difference between hurry up and tempo. Tempo, for you Auburn fans, you saw Tennessee run a little bit, Mississippi State with Mike Leach, where it's just go, go, go. When I'm running hurry up, I'm going to get to the line, kind of like what you saw Peyton Manning in the NFL when he was both at Indy and in Denver. I'm going to get to the line. I'm going to scan, make sure I see everything that's going on. And now the defense can't substitute. So I can wear down that defensive line for Clemson over a 4-quarter ball game. By forcing him to stay on the field, those 4 defensive linemen to stay on the field, I can now start to get plays on their legs. They're not in what I call full game shape yet. This is only the first week. So those legs aren't ready to go 60 snaps yet. And then I just rotate my running backs in and out. So I'll have Cook on, I'll have McIntosh, I'll have Milton, White. And I'm forcing Brent to now open up what he's going to show me before the snap. If JT Daniels is playing at a high level, he should be able to find out exactly where the matchup is on every single play. So here's what I want you guys to watch early on in the ball game. Is Georgia trying to play a lot of 4 wide receivers because of the pressure that's being put on JT Daniels being, quote unquote, the reason why they haven't gotten over the top in these ball games? If so, may not be the best outcome for Georgia in this matchup. If they go to some kind of version of what I just walked through, that puts Georgia in a much better situation for this ball game. So those are some keys to look out for in this contest. All right, we got another maybe 20 minutes before that first game in the SEC is scheduled to kick off with Kentucky and Louisiana Monroe. So you guys got any more questions for me in the chat? Would love to hear from you. Answer any questions we got before we go 2 minutes and really kind of run through these games really quickly, giving some final thoughts for each SEC team that's playing tonight. All right, so let's talk about this Texas A&M game versus Kent State. What I want to see from the Texas A&M side of things is what kind of offense they're going to run now that Kellen Mond is in the NFL, and they're going to basically be turning the reins over to Haynes King at the quarterbacking position. Haynes King is a dual threat quarterback. And then I want to also find out, how does this offensive line gel? You got basically a rotation where Kenyon Green, who is their only returning starter from last year, moving from the guard spot over the left tackle. Jameer Johnson, the transfer from Tennessee, projected to play that right tackle spot. Does he return to the form that we saw a couple of years ago, or honestly what we saw last year, which was not very good? Interested to see how that turns out. I think this Texas A&M defense should be just as good as we saw last year. Want to see how the corners hold up versus a lesser opponent. And I'm talking about Elijah Blades and Miles Jones, especially those two guys. How do they hold up in pass coverage against a team that they should absolutely dominate? A great question, Ethan. Ethan's asking, with Kiffin being out for Ole Miss, how do I think that game goes? Fortunately for Ole Miss, offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby will continue as the play caller. So I would not be surprised to see maybe since DJ Durkin has some head coaching experience when he was there in Maryland, kind of assume the duties of the head coach, but still being the primary defensive coordinator, and Jeff Lebby will handle all the offensive play calling duties as he's done since joining Lane at Ole Miss. Ethan, honestly, I don't see it making a huge difference just because Ole Miss is the more talented team in that matchup Monday night. Talked about it on my show over at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Matt Corral is one of the best quarterback prospects in the upcoming draft. We saw North Carolina quarterback Sam Howell really struggle last night. As long as Matt does not turn the ball over, and with his 14 INTs last year, 13 of those came in 3 ball games. Against Auburn, the horrible turnover game against Arkansas, which they still could have won that game, and against LSU, where I think he had 5 interceptions in that ball game. So as long as Matt's not turning the ball over, I think Ole Miss should not miss a beat. Expect to see with Jeff Lebby at the helm a lot of Jerrion Ely, Snoop Connor, Henry Parrish, their talented stable of running backs. If you didn't follow Ole Miss last year, these are, as a group, one of the best running back rooms in the SEC. I would put them pretty much dead even with Alabama, slightly ahead of Texas A&M and Kentucky. Those are really my 4 best running back rooms in all of the SEC. Love Kevin Harris for South Carolina. I just don't see the quality of depth behind him to really vote them into that top 4 as far as running back rooms in the SEC. Expect to see with the departure to the NFL of Elijah Moore, Jonathan Mingo, Dontario Drummond, Braylon Sanders. Expect those guys to really start to step up as far as being the next group of talented wide receivers to come out of Ole Miss. And you just take a look at some of the names that have come up from Ole Miss over the past couple of years. DK Metcalf with the Seattle Seahawks, AJ Brown with the Tennessee Titans, and now Elijah Moore, who is expected to have a huge rookie season there for the New York Jets. So I don't really see, while Lane Kiffin is definitely one of the best play callers in all of college football, I think because Jeff Lebby has been there with Lane, don't think it's going to affect them nearly as much in this ballgame. Ethan, yeah, your question, Ole Miss defense, will it improve? Ole Miss defense will improve with Matt Corral not turning the ball over. As I mentioned, when you turn the ball over as much as they did, especially in those 3 games that I mentioned versus Auburn, versus LSU, versus Arkansas, you put your defense in a bad situation. So if Matt isn't turning the ball over, I think that will help go a long way with Ole Miss defense improving this year. Lane Kiffin did a fantastic job of attacking the transfer portal, kind of like what you see in the NFL, where teams will attack a positional weakness first through free agency and the draft. Lane did a similar thing with the transfer portal, going into the JUCO ranks and high school recruiting, picking up Isaiah Iton to play that nose tackle position, one of the top-rated JUCO players at his position. Also from the JUCO ranks, Sam Williams and Taquarius Tisdale. All 3 JUCO players expected to play significant roles for Ole Miss this year. Also, out of the transfer portal from the University of Maryland, Chance Campbell will probably slide into that middle linebacker, forcing Momo Sangrio over to that Sam backer, and also from the JUCO ranks, picked up Lakia Henry, probably to play also in that inside defensive position. So when they go nickel, when they go dime, expect to see Momo and Henry on the field quite a bit, and probably mix in Chance Campbell quite a bit. Now, make no mistake, this defense has to get more pressure on the opposing quarterback. I think by bringing in some of those veteran guys from the JUCO ranks, yes, it's a step up in competition, but I expect to see a much better effort out of that Ole Miss defense. And like I said, if your offense isn't putting you in a bad defensive position, that will also help. What do I like? Well, when I'm on this show, I'm for every SEC team, especially in non-conference. So what we do over at Crunch Time Sports is we want to give you an honest, analytical breakdown of where your team is, both from a coaching standpoint, an offensive standpoint, defense, and special teams. So we take all of that, really blend it together in our databases, and really give you, the fans, a neutral look at all of your teams. So we'll be doing that throughout the entire SEC season. We'll give you each week, going into the Saturday games, where each of the 14 teams sit in our power rankings, whether it's the offensive side, defense, or special teams, and really, hopefully, give you a different perspective on how your team stacks up, both at in conference as well as in the country overall. So, great question there, Alabama Roll Tide. I'm just a fan of college football. I've been an analyst for over a decade. I've been around college football for almost 40 years. So ever since I was first able to pick up a football as a kid, I've been around this game. The SEC is home for me. I've gotten a chance to know all of the programs in the conference. So hopefully I can bring that unique insight to all of the shows that you'll find me on, whether it's here on the Voice of College Football Talking SEC or on our podcast that you can catch on any of your podcast subscribers, whether it's Google, iTunes, any of those platforms. So hopefully you'll give us a follow over there. My team does a fantastic job of getting me set up each week, and it's really been an honor and a privilege to work with such a fine group. Summer does a great job hosting the show, really setting the stage for Billy, who is one of our handicapping experts. Brittany does some behind-the-scenes analytics, and I'm your on-screen talent, for better or for worse, giving you my insight and analysis using all of those different systems to really break down each and every game of our featured games on that particular weekend. So on our show, we don't cover all of the SEC games. We will, however, when we switch over to the Voice of College Football, give you a detailed breakdown of all of the SEC games. So the bigger the matchup, the more we're going to feature that on the show. So like this weekend, we have 3 big-time matchups: Alabama and Miami this afternoon. Of course, the Clemson-Georgia game, which we've touched on. Louisville, Ole Miss. And now with that line creeping down, that LSU-UCLA game is kind of juicy for me. So really interested to see how this LSU team comes out, like I said, with the disruption that they've had due to the hurricane having to relocate, getting ready for this week's game, flying out Saturday. So really want to see if those kids who understandably so, could be distracted in this contest because there are much more important things going on for them down in Louisiana? Or can they lock in for the next 3 hours later tonight and put on an absolutely tremendous performance? It is a game that I will be watching very, very closely. And guys, we got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to do one more run through of all of these games that you can catch here on the SEC. And give me just a second. Let me see if I can scroll back up and find that. Yeah, let's put that back up. Yes, you can join us for post games all night long. I will be here at 9 o'clock Eastern time, breaking down the contests that have already wrapped up in the SEC and start winding down the primetime matchups. Be sure to catch the Florida FAU breakdown, Texas A&M versus Kent State breakdown. So really looking forward to rejoining you guys tonight on the voice of college football, talking SEC. So let's go 2 minutes here. Kentucky, Louisiana Monroe. Looking forward to seeing this new Kentucky offense led by offensive coordinator Liam Cohen coming over from the LA Rams to install that offense that I've watched them run there in LA under head coach Sean McVay for the last couple of years. Really excited to see the transfer of Wan'Dale Robinson coming back home to Kentucky and Will Levis in that matchup. Arkansas versus Wright. Want to see if this Arkansas offense can take a step forward under quarterback KJ Jefferson, who would be taking over this year for Felipe Franks, who is now in the NFL. Alabama, Miami. We've already broken down that matchup. Bryce Young getting his first start as the quarterback of the University of Alabama, taking on the University of Miami. Should be a fantastic game coming up this afternoon. Mississippi State hosting La Tech. Want to see how the quarterback breakdown goes for Mississippi State. Not so much who starts the game, whether it's Jack Abraham, the transfer from Southern Miss, or Will Rogers, but want to see which one of those quarterbacks really steps up and takes over as the primary signal caller there for Mike Leach this season. Missouri, Central Michigan coming up here this afternoon at 3 o'clock Central Time. Want to see Connor Baselak, the quarterback for Missouri. How does he take a step forward at the quarterback position? And guys, a big key for Missouri in this ballgame, they're replacing their two emotional leaders and probably their best players from last season. Running back Larry Roundtree III, a dynamic running back for Missouri last year. Almost 97 yards per game on the ground, 209 carries, 14 rushing touchdowns. Tyler Beatty steps in to fill those huge shoes. Is not the same physical running back that Roundtree was last year. So interested to see how that running game goes, because they have a huge matchup next week when they travel to Lexington to face the Kentucky Wildcats. On the defensive side, you lose their best player on the defensive side, and that's Nick Bolton. Just a fantastic player. You're talking 95 total tackles, 7.5 of those for loss, 2 sacks. Who steps into those shoes, whether it's Jamal Brooks or Cameron Wilkes, to be that Mike linebacker for Missouri in this contest? Auburn versus Akron should not be a close contest whatsoever, but want to see how early Brian Hartson rotates in TJ Finley in this matchup. South Carolina taking on Eastern Illinois. We know that Luke Doty is out with a foot injury. I'm looking for a big-time performance in that first half out of Kevin Harris, talented running back, the leading returning rusher in the Southeastern Conference. And really want to see maybe one of the best pass rushers that nobody talks about in the Southeastern Conference, and that's defensive end for South Carolina, Kinsley Ingenbar. Fantastic season last year for this senior defensive end. Want to see him grow in the numbers that he put up last year. 6 sacks. Want to see if he can get into that 12, 13 number for the Gamecocks this year. Georgia Clemson, we've talked about that matchup. It's going to be interesting which personnel grouping Todd Monken, offensive coordinator for Georgia, goes with in this ball game. If he tries to spread out Clemson, I'm going to say advantage Clemson. If he plays with more running backs on the field, I'm going to say advantage Georgia. Interested to see how that ball game squares up. Florida Atlantic. Once again, game should not be within doubt. Want to see if Emory Jones can improve as a passer in this ball game. What we've seen during his career at the University of Florida, not very good at the deep passing game whatsoever. If that is the case early on, expect to see Anthony Richardson come into this ball game, and Dan Mullen finds out if Anthony Richardson can give him something more from the deep passing game, which you're going to need, especially come week 3 when Alabama comes to town in Gainesville. Texas A&M, Kent State, just touched on that a few minutes ago. It's all about the quarterbacking position. Haynes King, does he establish himself as the clear-cut quarterback there for the Aggies and Jimbo Fisher? Or if he struggles, do we see redshirt sophomore Zach Calzada come in and get some meaningful snaps? We know that talented running back Isaiah Spiller is going to be a problem to deal with, but only if that offensive line for Texas A&M gels really quickly. Got another minute or so before we have to get out of here. Vandy, just want to see how Clark Lee back home at his alma mater does in this ball game. And wrapping up, LSU, UCLA. How does LSU manage the pressure and expectation coming into this season? Big year for Coach O. Cannot afford a loss in this ball game. For everyone here at the Voices College Football Talking SEC, this has been Kenneth. Hopefully you've enjoyed the lead up to college football. We got Kentucky and Louisiana Monroe getting ready to kick off here in just a minute. Enjoy the games, everybody. See you on the wrap up later tonight.